Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sounds on the Couch. I am very excited to introduce the guest that I have for you today. So, Eleanor Rigden is a producer of the Festival of Small Halls for Woodfordia Inc., which is Australia's largest regionally dedicated music tour. It's also the organisation that runs Woodford Folk Festival. Her role involves overseeing all operational and promotional and strategic aspects of the touring program that they have, and has worked with many international and Australian artists. The Festival of Small Halls celebrates the revival of traditional community venues and currently tours the best Australian and international contemporary and folk musicians throughout Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and South Australia. She's joining us today to talk to us all about touring and opening your eyes to the potential of getting involved with your local halls. So I know you'll be really eager to listen to what she's got to say, and so I will bring her up now. Hello, Eleanor.
Hi, how you going?
Hey. Good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll just jump straight in. So would you like to maybe just start by letting us know a little bit about your background and what sort of led you to what you're doing now?
I mean, you'd covered my role so exhaustively just then. I actually started ticking off boxes in my head like it was a checklist, and it's just kind of like, oh my God, am I supposed to be doing something here? It felt like being back in the producer chair. But so, yeah, as you said, I produce Festival of Small Halls, which is a music tour dedicated exclusively to regional, rural, and remote Australia. I hope we are still the biggest or most frequent regional music tour. So we're constantly on the road rather than going out once or twice a year, like a lot of regional music tours that go to much bigger places. And we celebrate community venues. So for most people, that's the beautiful community hall, all layered with history and memory and wonderful community rituals. And as you said, we tour the finest of Australian and international music in the folk and acoustic genre or contemporary folk genre. It's about developing a market for that type of music, but mostly it's about getting really high quality artists off the beaten track a little bit and into places that they don't get to see and also that don't get to see them. So it's kind of the most common thing that people say about our tours is that it's brilliant for the audience, getting these artists locally, not driving into the city, no babysitter, no room hire, no exhaustive, expensive, process to getting to see a show, but also for the musicians who always tell us that, they've never been to these types of places before and probably would never have thought about it. So that's very rewarding.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And how did you get into that kind of thing? Like, was this a bit of a journey for you, or was it something that you always knew that you wanted to do?
No, this is going to kill career planners everywhere, but it was a total accident. So I trained as a lawyer. I have a law and a media degree, and I got admitted to the Supreme Court of Queensland in 2013, I want to say, 2013. Started my probationary year as a lawyer and lasted all of 8 months before I was made redundant and snapped up by the Woodford Folk Festival for a temp job, and the temp job turned into another job that I have never left. So
one of those things, I guess, where things just seem to happen for a reason. Obviously, you were in something completely different, and now look where you are. It's amazing.
Woodfordia is very like that. I think people find a world there rather than just a festival, a series of festivals. And I mean, that's what they aim to do. They aim to produce a city, a couple of times a year where people can shed the layers of their ordinary lives and become, their best selves, which sounds like a self-help book, but, then you go there and you see how it, how immersive it is. And yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that impact, it goes in so many directions as well. When you're looking at these regional towns, I guess there's so much benefit to those towns and also to the artists that are involved. So what's your experience been like in terms of how those towns have been affected by what you've been putting together?
Honestly, I'm so excited. I mean, I guess you could say, I think I have to say anecdotally, since I haven't conducted any research, but I mean, these anecdotes are backed up by, quite a lot of people who have a lot more experience than me, who've done extensive research on the mental health benefits, the community benefits, the artistic benefits. So we always make sure to leverage the profiles of an emerging artist from the local area when we go to visit. I think that the sense of connection that people, so I think as a great example, right, we go to one town down in Victoria that came very close to being eliminated in the Black Saturday fires. They literally had this sort of ring of fire around their town, and they came through fine. But what they realized is that they actually relied on each other, with their remote location. They needed each other to get through that disaster, not just the disaster itself, but through the stress and the trauma and the social repercussions afterwards. So once a month, this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere out near the Grampians has what they call a community resilience dinner. And that kind of blew me away, because that's the strategy that we're working along, that when you bring people together, they will be more resilient and they will feel better and more connected and be able to move forward, in a stronger position to support each other. And these guys, most of these towns we go to already have tiny little things like that going on, which aren't tiny at all. People look at it and might just see a plate of food and a few shared conversations, and, it's magic. It's people coming together and aligning and strategically planning that they need to, be that way to tackle the challenges of life together. And that for me is like a pin-up story of what these towns are about.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely beautiful. You also seem to live, like, from an external point of view, you live a very interesting life. I know that you've just been driving back from Woodford just before this interview, and so as a part of your work as well. Would you be able to maybe let us know a little bit about what an average day would look like when you're working with Woodford?
I have a very stressful job, so at the moment, a good chunk of the average day is wondering when I'll get some help. But no, so it depends whether we're on tour or off tour. So Festival of Small Halls, as I said before, is a year-round production. So we produce like a series of tours. So it depends where each tour is at. So if someone's on tour, for example, they're managed on the road, so they might need some light support with a venue being set for that night or making some last minute changes. So a great example right now is your viewers might be spread across the country. So we're in Queensland, where we've just had some much celebrated changes to the COVID rules in terms of how many people you can fit in a building for a COVID safe event. And they changed the rules in a good way, but they still did it on the day before we were due to set off. So all of the ticketing had to be reviewed, and all of the buildings had to be reviewed, and all of the square meters had to be reviewed to make sure that when we released more tickets to all the shows that we were still remaining in those sort of parameters of Queensland Health. So that's an unusual sort of hands-on approach to a tour for me. Usually once it's produced, it gets put into a book, which we spend many hours putting together, that dictate the lives of the artists and the crew on the road and send them off. We're often talking to new hosts who want to join in the tours and explaining how they work to them. Sometimes we are putting together funding applications. We are a funding reliant project, so we spend a lot of time trying to explain what we do to people so that they, if we align with them, they might give us money. Gosh, what else do we do in a day? See, today was a big reporting day, so I've sat there trying to work out, you bring the credit card back in from tour and you start marking off all the accommodation and, hope that nothing big spots springs up. But I work in an office like most other people, so yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah, sorry, that was probably quite extensive.
No, it's great. So maybe for those who might not be aware what a local hall is, or how artists can get involved in this way, would you be able to maybe give a little bit of an explanation to them what this is?
Absolutely. So a big part of what we do is developing communities to be able to present music after we leave. So we're not like we're not a commercial entity in the sense that once we visit a building, it's ours and ours forever. Like a show in a hall is a very old concept. It's older than us. It's older than all the other brilliant people who are also, there are other brilliant people doing shows in halls right now. Like, it's not an exclusive concept. And I think what everybody wants in that sector, or everywhere hopefully, is just more shows. But what really strikes me very often is the disconnect. So we have a lot of, not even just halls, we have a lot of people seeking to repurpose both community and private spaces to bring music in. And there's like this perception that, they need to connect with an agent or a programmer or a big festival like Woodford to find those artists. And so something that I'm noticing a lot. Well, I mean, and I just don't think that's true, because if I went back and asked all the artists that we've ever toured, hey, would you like to be in touch with, XYZ venues in case you're ever passing through the area? I mean, 9 times out of 10, the answer would be yes. And the only no would be someone who's so bogged down in admin, that they can't cope, and they've just had maybe 2 kids in lockdown, and, like they just can't, they don't have the capacity. But I think that there's a real, there's a step missing there. The fact that there's venues or places that want music, and there's artists that want gigs, and those two things don't always connect. So I would encourage people to reach out to, not even just your halls, but yes, your local halls, your local venues. The most recent interesting one I came across was actually a farmer that I know who's crossed over into quite a lot of the ecotourism stuff. So, they get people out onto their farm for a market day, or, a patting the pigs day and seeing how the free range piggies live and that sort of thing. And they want music for their market days. So I think being engaged in your community can really show people opportunities that don't exist in the traditional, artist agent festival sort of relationship.
Yeah. And so what do you think are maybe some of the biggest things that maybe need to change in terms of bridging that connect a little bit more?
I think that there's a lot to be said for, in my line of work, there's a lot to be said for some of the brilliant regional arts organisations. So there's a difference between regional arts funding and regional arts service providers. And I think that regional arts service providers need to be locals who are engaged in their communities and who can really form a bridge, a bridge between those networks. Because it's not always viable for an artist to, may or may not be a full-time working musician, so they might have another job to juggle, even if they're not. You've got albums, you've got releases, you've got media strategy, you might have a manager, but, you might also be doing festival applications. It's busy. And community engagement without the hope of a gig, clear in front of you isn't always within, your time parameters to do. So I'm a big believer in the regional space. Obviously, that wouldn't work out for the cities, but having service organisations funded by the states in those locations to really translate community desire and form a bridge between people looking to come in and people looking to bring people in.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I guess the halls are doing that in a level as well. If someone did want to get in touch with maybe their local hall, how can they find them?
The halls the halls that are up to programming music themselves all have their own Facebook pages. Sometimes they'll have a website. They're active. And sometimes it might not be immediately obvious that they're doing gigs. So, my rule of thumb is that the further south you go on the mainland Australia, the more likely it is that they're doing gigs. But so many halls are starting to band together into little regional cooperatives. And there's the most established and amazing places in the middle of nowhere. So, those places are active on social media, and we'll probably welcome a message. Yeah.
Oh, great. And so how long does an average tour go for when you're out with the Festival of Small Halls?
4 weeks. So we're on tour 4 weeks. So we were doing 20 shows a tour. The most recent ones have been shorter. So we've just done 3 and 2 weeks respectively. Now that felt like a sensible thing to do with COVID and the uncertainty of whether or not the tours would even happen, from the other side of them actually happening, which is amazing. So, it is a time period that you need to be hardy for, I think. A lot of artists, I'd love to be in the world where we go home, maybe hit the road for Saturday, Sunday, sorry. But most of the time you're in a car with 6 other people for 4 weeks. You've got to minimize the eating of tuna and maximize the sleeping when you're supposed to. And you've got to go on with a plan.
Yeah. Are there any things that you would recommend as people are going through that experience to stay resilient and to take care of themselves in that process?
Yeah, eat well, minimize the alcohol, sleep that what you need to sleep, and you sleep a healthy amount, and commit to the experience. Like, it's really going to be hard when you're missing your family, and you might have taken time off work and be worried about something there. But touring is about audience engagement, and the audience know when you're not just thinking, when you're not thinking about them. If your mind's somewhere else while you're on stage, you might as well not be there. You know what I mean? It's an opportunity it's the best kind of engagement with your core audience, but it's also what's going to win you new audiences. And they remember your songs, but they also remember your stories, and they remember your personality. And I think if you're not fully committed to being there, it does show. Yeah.
And do you think that there's some work that maybe needs to be done in terms of developing those skills outside just the music as well, like the storytelling and the engagement with audience?
I mean, I have the benefit of working in folk music, so we don't really do anything else. But I think that's quite genre specific as well. Like the heavy metal crew are obviously less interested in you sit down and you chat afterwards, aren't they? But they don't feel any less engaged through that communal experience on the dance floor or the mosh pit or whatever. I think it's about knowing your audience and knowing how to engage with them. But put the time in, like it shows, at every level, from your merchandise, maybe, working or being particularly innovative, or, like a colouring book or pencils or something a bit different to what everyone else has, or to the way that you talk to people, being genuinely interested in why they came to see your concert when, they could have picked any concert. They could have been anywhere that night and they chose you. Like, why did they choose you? And engaging with other people on tour. So, I mean, I said goodbye to our last touring party on Sunday, sort of 2 days ago now, and they all cried when they said goodbye. And I just know that that's not the end for them. They'll write a song together, they'll collaborate, they'll feed opportunities each other's way. And I think that that's kind of overlooked sometimes too, the opportunities that can come your way from other artists. So yeah, embrace it.
Well, I guess if you're spending all that time in a car and staying together and traveling together and having those experiences together, I guess there is so much that can be gained from that. And what do you think are some of the main kind of benefits of going on one of these tours that might just be outside just the experience of playing?
I mean, we have a lot of artists who've come back with albums of songwriting material. You go out. I mean, once you get out of your comfort zone, you're experiencing things that are new and magical to you, and that's inspiring. That's material to write about. I think in the technical sense, you can learn from other artists as well. So we've seen artists coach each other through, different techniques of singing, or invite them to join, for a joint number, which might involve harmonizing, which they don't typically do for their own act. I think you can develop through touring, certainly. But, I mean, my favourite stories are always when artists come back with songs about their experiences because something they saw was magical or frightening or unusual or moving. It's usually moving. It's usually a person they've met who's moved them. And I think you have to, I mean, what a magical thing to be able to do as an artist, to get out of your comfort zone and to be so, moved down to your very soul, for your songwriting material. I don't know. I think it's great.
Oh, it's so good. And what do you think have been some of the most memorable experiences that you've had along this journey?
I don't even know if I could pick, to be honest. It's definitely my relationships with the communities and the artists. I mean, some of them have become dear friends. And, I mean, with the communities, I know their families, I know their kids. I think there's a woman that I worked with in a hall a long time ago, and she put together the hall committee to save her hall. It was going to be sold and well, hopefully not, but sold and knocked down in the coming days. So she put together a concert, the Festival of Small Halls concert, saved the hall, and because of that, the hall got used on an ongoing basis. They started clogging classes and dancing classes. And last year I went to visit that hall for the show, and that woman wasn't there. It turned out that her husband had been in an ambulance the night of the show, and he subsequently passed away. And the woman wrote to me afterwards, and she said that if it wasn't for, starting this journey 3 years ago, I might be facing, widowhood alone. And I'm not facing it alone. I'm facing it with the whole community around me. And for me, that really just summed up sort of in one little email what it means to not be alone, and what it means, the power of music to bring us together, and how far it ripples. You just never know. You know what I mean? You never know what you've done for someone by giving them a show that night, or what you've done for someone by sitting down and having a chat. You really don't. And it's really powerful. Yeah.
No, that's so powerful. No, thank you so much for sharing. Do you think, obviously, when you're doing these live shows and you're doing the tours, there's so much that can go wrong when you're when you're going through the motions. And and so what have been some of the challenges that you've had, and how have you kind of overcome those in that moment?
I mean, the single greatest challenge has been the bushfires. I still feel quite traumatized emotionally by that process. And, I wasn't even there, but just raking through all the fire reports every day to see if, our team were going to have to cross a fire front that day, or if a community hall, if the wind had changed and something terrible was going to happen to their town. We did visit halls that had the community around them raised over the last summer of touring. And, like I said, those relationships that you build, and then how impacted they are. It was logistically challenging looking at the route every day and seeing if a fire had jumped a road. It was challenging for the artists because of the smoke inhalation and their voices. It's challenging for the communities because they didn't know if, a fire might turn deadly, or indeed it was deadly, and if it would turn in their direction. So absolute the fires, but, there's been a few smaller incidences, road accidents. We hit a kangaroo a few years ago. Devastating because it was the production vehicle with all the gear in it that hit the roof. And sometimes touring parties don't work out, so those are challenging times too, when, the human relationships aren't in the car. It's a tuna, don't eat the, no, just kidding.
Stay away from the tuna.
No, the fires are absolutely the most challenging thing, and it's we're really mindful now as fire season is back, and people are, we visited a hall on Thursday night, and they've had a bushfire start on Friday. So we're very mindful of the needs of people at the moment, artists, communities, audience, everyone. Coming from bushfire to pandemic, potentially back to bushfires, it's awful. And music is so needed in that space.
Yeah, and it's a way that all of our artists can get involved more in having that kind of impact. So some of our artists that may be watching are looking to get more involved, or maybe just start for the very first time in doing some touring, whether it's through a hall or outside that. What are some things that they maybe need to start considering for themselves and with their music?
So I'm an administrator, so I think to all of the boring things that people, probably shouldn't think to first, but definitely think about them at some stage. Be tour ready, have your media package ready to go, have a decent photo that's well lit where you're looking at the camera, have a bio ready to go. I mean, some organizations will invest their time into making you tour ready if you're the artist they want, but a lot won't. Be tour hardy. If you've just had a toddler, it might not be the time. Save it for a time when you can commit to that experience and not need to be in two places at once, emotionally and physically. I think vocally you have to be at a certain point. So, I was just talking then about smoke inhalation affecting vocals. Vocals are obviously finite things, and I think that you need to be at a stage in your development where that you can do 20 shows in a row over a short period of time. Regardless of how well you're eating or drinking or sleeping, that's tough. And I think what's great as an administrator as well is when you have the option to scale up or down groups. So whether if you want a band on a particular tour, or you want to strip them back to an acoustic, artists that can do that quite flexibly are obviously attractive. If you find yourself working within a budget that you didn't think you were going to be, or you're touring smaller venues where a bigger sound isn't suitable, or you're looking for a certain sound, and just I guess professionally, just play. I know it sounds like such a cliche, but play every gig that you can, because the audience development aspect of it also requires training in the same way that your voice and your picking skills and all those sorts of things do. You have to get used to talking to strangers every night, and treating them it's like your first night every night.
Yeah. Have you had many artists that have come through that maybe didn't expect it to be quite so taxing on their vocals or their body throughout the tour? Like, have you had artists that have really struggled with that?
Yes, but I won't name names. But I will say there's something to an adrenaline drop as well. So something that we did every year was we had a tour that went for 4 weeks, and then we'd give the artist a week off before we gave them a week at a festival, because we thought, oh, they'll have a week off, they'll rest. And almost universally, the artists in that week got sick. And it was like their bodies had been going on some sort of adrenaline rush. And they said, oh, it's and there is something chemical to that. When you slow down, your body goes into survival mode and said, this is your opportunity to heal. And so a lot of them were actually going to the festival feeling really under the weather. And I don't think anyone expected that, because they thought, oh, a week off will be a great idea. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to leave my advice as, don't take time off. But there is something to be said for packaging up tours and strategizing, going at them, giving your all, and then having proper time off afterwards where you can recuperate and really go into healing mode. So, yeah.
No, I think that's really good advice for people.
Yeah. And being in a pandemic is not time off. Lockdown is not time off.
If someone is maybe looking to do a tour that maybe is outside this kind of thing, what are some of the roles of people they might need to get involved if they don't have those kinds of organisers sort of at their fingertips doing this?
I mean, one of the things artists always say to us about our tours is how wonderful it is having someone organise everything for them, which I think means it's unusual that someone does organise end-to-end the way that we do. So, it's the full deal, I suppose. So a lot of artists that I know book their own tours. They book the venues, they book their accommodation. I think you do need to treat yourself as an administrator and make sure you're paying yourself for that time. It shouldn't just be something that's necessary to get on tour. Put yourself together an itinerary, and I guess, the biggest thing logistically is tech. So are you only going to go to venues that have pre-installed tech? And if so, does that come with, an operator, and does the venue take care of that? Or are you going to travel with, especially if you're a stripped back band, you're going to travel with a PA and an operator, which means that you can go, anywhere you want, anywhere that can hold your PA. I think financially that's, a big shaping decision about where you can and can't go. A tour manager is great, but like I said, if you're organised, you can do it. But I also think that I love it when artists know if they're organised or not. You know what I mean? Like it's brilliant when you're organised, and it's brilliant when you're not organised, and you're like, okay, it's worth my career to knock off 10% and get a manager. Like, you know your strengths, and if admin isn't one of them, don't push yourself, because it'll just compromise your ability to make great music and put your time into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so much to be said by not trying to do everything yourself. Talking about losing my voice. And what kind of contracts or insurances do you need in getting it? I mean, having a lawyer background, this might be a good question for you as well. But what kind of sort of contracts and insurances would artists need to be starting up touring?
All artists at a minimum need public liability insurance. I'm always really surprised. It actually comes in more with international artists than Australians. Australians are pretty good at understanding the need for PLI. I mean, a lot of festivals won't book you without citing your certificate. It can be really cheap. You can let it lapse and pick it up again, when you get a booking. That's at a minimum. I mean, I'd usually advise looking into, travel insurance if you're going to be on the road a lot, particularly if you're traveling with your gear and it's expensive. I know of one band who left all their gear in a car in Perth, and the car was broken into, and all their guitars, all of their like PA foldback, everything was burgled, and they had no insurance. So not only was the tour, they had to, I can't remember if they borrowed instruments to keep the tour going or not, but it was just awful, So travel insurance is great. And if you do get travel insurance, make sure the hire company, if you hire a car, isn't then charging you double on that. And then what was the other question? Contracts. So we have a favorite saying. I'm actually not going to say who's we, but we have a favorite saying, and it is called "Enthusiasm is not a contract." And I think that's all you really need to say about contracts. Enthusiasm is not a contract. Get one.
No, that's great.
Doesn't matter if it's not formal. It doesn't need to be legally. I mean, I think there's this perception that, contracts need to be intimidating. Like, I mean, the legal profession, should frown on things that are written in legalese. The idea of a contract is that two people completely understand their obligations towards each other. So if that's not the case, rewrite it, clarify it, ask questions about it. It's far better to ask questions that's the stage for asking questions, not halfway through. And I think that things are just better when people ask questions about their contracts and understand all their obligations from the outset. Yeah, I guess I'll say that.
So what do you think the future of live music and touring is going to look like as time goes on? I mean, we're just post-COVID as well. Do you think that that's going to make any change to how things move forward?
I don't know, because I think that there's always, there always seems to be conversations that seem to cancel each other out, the arts is critical for the arts is really good for mental health, for example, versus the arts gets no federal funding, or the arts contributes to tourism versus, there's no one, regional tourism organizations don't have an arts officer or an arts arm or something like that. I think that coming out of the pandemic, I really hope that it's not a conversation that's overlooked how essential, our process of telling stories to each other is in how we bounce back. But I also think that before the pandemic, the arts was becoming a fantastic part of the conversation about livability. And tourism plays into that conversation, but there's been a lot less focus on, one show needing to tick up X number of visitor nights or X number of, hotel bookings or whatever, and more about permanent infrastructure. So I've noticed some of the, I can't remember if it's the Federal Arts Grants or the Victorian State, but they've recently invested in some large placemaking arts projects. Up here in Queensland, we have silo art. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but beautiful, big paintings and graffiti on traditional silos, and it's this wonderful marriage of rural life and picturesque Australian landscape and the arts, and those things contribute to make people proud of where they live. They contribute to help people visit where they live. I think that the arts in livability is coming up as a fantastic conversation, but I do hope that it's acknowledged as such a critical part of how we all bounce back from, frankly, this collective trauma that we've all just lived through.
And it's such a healing thing, isn't it, as well? Like music and art, in history, it's been used as a tool to heal. And so, there's
great. A phenomenal amount of research, and I think that's what can be exasperating is that, research for research's sake isn't useful, but then research when someone with the will and the political power to say, look, this makes people feel good. This brings people with, high risk aspects to their behavior or personalities into the loving arms of a community who can help them work through those things, or this has inspired people to take up new aspects of their career or to start a journey of creativity. It's the ways that it affects people are quite infinite, and I think that musicians know that. I hope that it's more broadly in the public view, I suppose, in the days to come.
Oh, absolutely. Is there anything else at the moment that you might like to share with our audience before we finish up?
I think that artists, I think I said should so many times in that conversation, and none of those are directed at artists really, because artists are motivated by passion, right? So deep down, you're doing the right thing by sort of heeding that call and making more brilliant content. I think times are so hard right now, and it would be so easy to feel undervalued or dispirited, or locked off. And I just don't think that's the case at all. I think that everyone is feeling that way. So it's kind of hard to break out of, isn't it? But please, for everyone's sake, keep doing what you're doing. Make beautiful, beautiful music and make people happy. Make yourselves happy. Yeah,
Oh,
that
that's
wasn't very well
so
put together.
amazing. No,
Hopefully the
it was great.
sentiment shines
It was
through.
beautiful and raw. Thank you so much for joining us today, Eleanor. It's been really insightful and really
Oh,
interesting. So thank you.
so, no, thank you so much. I hope